Welcome to the Aspen Collective, 213 South Mill Street in the Wheeler Opera House. We are excited to have with us Jamie Kripke, coming all the way from Boulder, Colorado. He comes to the Valley quite a bit, actually, and we've had a lovely relationship since we met. And Brad Frentress introduced us, Studio Como. And it's been a real joy to get to know Jamie and see his work and its evolution. This show is called Altered Atlas. And I want to just ask you a little bit, can you explain kind of the genesis and the idea behind this show?
So I've been a photographer and a skier my whole life. And I've been collecting images of mountains as long as I can remember. I've traveled all over the world, and I have this kind of deep library of mountain images. And so I had all these existing images that I knew I wanted to use for something. But then my daughter is a freshman at UC Santa Barbara, and when she left for school, she left her little sewing machine on our kitchen table, and it sat there for probably a week before I realized, oh, no one's going to put this thing away. And so I just picked it up and took it in my studio, and I started messing around and sewing. And it was just like something I'd been interested in, but like her leaving the machine there was sort of like a sign to me. And so I took it in the studio and I started just grabbing things and sewing them together. I had like stacks of old prints, and I started cutting them and collaging stuff, and then experimenting with different kind of stitches and threads and paper thicknesses. And then once I kind of worked that out, that was when I brought in all of these images and started collaging them together as a way to be sort of a record of all of my time in the mountains.
Cool. Yeah. As a curator here at the gallery, I've been showing a lot of different work, and in the last year or so, I made some real hard ground rules here, and a couple of them are no more horses, no more cowboys, and no more mountains.
No more mountains.
And this idea for this show, though, really captivated me because we had talked a lot about originals versus digital. And in this age of AI and, fascinating digital work, which I think you've worked in the past, and we showed it here, there's something about the tactile nature of one-of-a-kinds. So can you talk a little bit about your past and the digital work, and then what it's like working in analog?
Yeah, well, I mean, I come from a background in advertising. I spent 20 plus years traveling the world, shooting ads and campaigns for all sorts of companies and agencies and brands. And that's very much a digital workflow. But my sort of like counterbalance to that has always been, shooting film. I got into printmaking. I was doing woodblock printing. I started an analog clock company about 5 years ago. And I'm also doing these like vinyl listening events. And then this project is just an extension of that interest in analog processes. I still love working digitally, but as like things get more like increasingly automated and easier to do with zeros and ones, I keep looking at like what are some ways that I can, make it more human and more unique and one of a kind, and something that a computer or a machine like literally can't do.
Yeah, one of the things I really admire about you is that you're multifaceted. And, he keeps revealing himself like an onion. And, one morning I wake up and I pull up my social media, and there's Jamie on the New York Times talking about the clock. And I kind of sent you some funny messages about, holy shit, I had no idea. Can you talk just briefly about the philosophy behind that?
Yeah, so it was around when I had like cut made a clean cut with the advertising world. Like I was done with that. I was done with that phase of my life. But because I'd been in this mode of just continually making stuff, there was this sort of hole that I wanted to fill. And I had this idea for a clock that would replace the phones on our nightstands, because I think we're all like feeling this, this that we're tethered to our phones like more than we would like. And I looked around for a clock that I thought would be great, and I just like literally couldn't find anything. And one day I was just like, I think I might just make it. And then I bumped into a friend who had experience with developing and manufacturing products. I told him about the idea. He was like, we can totally do this. And then, that was 5 years ago. But ultimately it came from like a desire to sort of disconnect, especially at night, but also like to fulfill my need to kind of like continually create stuff. And I thought it'd be fun to work in 3 dimensions and learn something new. And I learned a lot in that experience. But the New York Times thing literally came up so randomly because I was in Japan this past December, and I went to a bar with a buddy of mine and randomly started talking to this woman. And turns out she was a writer from the New York Times who writes about clocks and watches in Tokyo. And so I told her about this, and she loved it and pitched the idea, and then the whole thing kind of took off.
And we'll get back to Japan in a minute.
Yeah.
But, as a musician and someone who loves music, I think that there's a really interesting interplay with what you do on the music side of things. And last year during the Aspen Design Conference, Jamie set up shop here, and we had the most interesting designers from around the world here hanging out, and you were playing music, but you also do this very interesting event that it's become very popular in Boulder about listening and opening your mind. And I think that is in this strange vein that you're building. But can you talk a little bit about these listening events, which we're going to host one tonight here in the gallery?
Yeah. The events came from we'd been living in Tokyo for 6 months and returned to the US in the fall of the 2024 presidential election. And coming from Japan into that environment felt very kind of disruptive and noisy, and kind of like, it just didn't feel good. And I was looking at this and thinking what if, is there something I could do to sort of give people an opportunity to practice listening? Because personally, I believe that if we could all get a little better at listening, we could solve lots of problems. And it's not just 2 people. It could be 2 countries, 2 political parties, 2, name anything where there tends to be this conflict where people aren't hearing each other. And I just think listening is the answer to so many things. So I developed this event where people come and they turn their phones off, they drop them in a little basket by the door, and then I give a short talk, and then we sit and listen to 1 hour of a really nice variety of music that takes you on this sort of journey and really stretches your listening skills. And it's been really interesting because people come up to me afterwards and they talk about how they'll hear songs that they thought they knew, but then they hear them when they're giving it their full attention, and it's like a new song to them, and it's like a new experience. And that is what I'm really interested in. It's like unlocking this next level of listening. So yeah.
And is Japanophile a word?
I think so. Yeah.
Xenophile?
Yeah. It's probably a Japanophile.
Japanophile.
That works. Yeah.
And this man knows a lot about Japan. And when I went in late November, early December, he gave me an incredible list of things to do. But he also said, just go and walk and be open and find your place. And Tokyo in particular is a great place for that. But can you talk a little bit about how Japanese art and aesthetics, and maybe some of your wood block cuts. How does that fit into your artistic practice?
Yeah, well, I think I was drawn to woodblock printing because it really demands like focus and craftsmanship more than almost any other sort of artistic medium that I've tried. Um, and I love that demand for focus and intention. But I was lucky enough to study it not only here at Anderson Ranch, but also in Japan when I was there. And I don't know, that just really, like, I love the process of just like settling in and just getting lost in this thing. And I think we all know what that kind of feels like, and that's kind of something we're always looking for. But the woodblock printing and the interest in Japanese art and aesthetics eventually led me to another artist named Tadanori Yoko, he's like an interesting character. I mean, you might call him sort of like a Japanese Andy Warhol. Like, he started as a commercial artist in the 60s and 70s in Japan, and he had these really intricate, beautiful silkscreens and lithos. And when I saw his work, I didn't know about him until I'd been in Tokyo. I just kind of stumbled on one of his books, and I just fell in love with his work and learned as much as I could about it, got every book I could. And like a lot of what you see here in this work is inspired directly from his sort of collages and also his color palettes. And so in a way, like the trip to Japan and discovering this art and the woodblock printing it's all contained in these. Like, it's all kind of like progressing together in the same like on the same path.
And it's interesting you mentioned Andy Warhol, who was originally an advertising kind of guy, designing the windows on Madison Avenue.
Yeah.
And then his evolution. One thing I want to mention about these pieces in particular, I love it that there's these like hanging threads and almost like this very particular clean thing all of a sudden kind of invaded by these hanging chads, if you will.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the threads are, I mean, for me, they mean a few different things. Like, one is it's the mark that this was created by a human. It's not perfect. It's messy. It's imperfect. And I think the more of that we can include in art, the better. It's also like, for me, they sort of evoke climbing ropes hanging off peaks. And so like, it's fun to think about these little threads being these little climbing ropes. You can almost like put yourself there in the environment, and it changes the scale of the work. The other thing that I sort of discovered inadvertently is because we're in Colorado and it's so dry here, the static electricity varies with the humidity and the weather. And I've noticed that the threads inside the frame, they shift and move, and they have their own life. And I think that's interesting because it's sort of like, we all, around here, we all know what mountain weather is like. It's unpredictable and it's chaotic, and it's like, you can't really figure it out. And I kind of love that these pieces are going to change with the seasons. In the winter, when it's dry, you'll see the static charge affect the threads. And then in the summer and spring, when the humidity goes up, they'll start to hang and just be more limp. And then the next winter, they'll come back to life. So I think it's fun.
If there's one piece that you really love out of this body, in particular, my favorite, the smallest one, can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I had to pick one that I kind of come back to, it's probably this one here. I always thought of this as sort of the centerpiece of the show. Can't say why, it just feels like the closest kind of version of what I was trying to make. But yeah, this one is interesting because, the way I make these is I print these strips on paper, I cut everything by hand, and then I sew it together and I assemble it. But this was the very last piece I made, and it was using all of the scraps and clippings from all of these other prints. So, and some of them were just like failed prints. Like, I think I mentioned to you, like, I love the work of like Wade Guyton, who does these kind of glitchy inkjet prints where he'll deliberately like break the printer and then make prints, and they make these kind of like messed up, it looks like the registration's off. And this whole strip up here is actually like a failed print where the printer just kept going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in the same place for like way too long. And then I pulled the print out, and it was this beautiful kind of rich black thing you could not create any other way. And so it's just another example of like my interest in analog processes and like the way they're not perfect. And so this halftone pattern is also a reference to that, as well as like I'm adding like film grain to some images, and then in some others, like there's these, this is like a reference to that kind of like out of whack printer, these lines. So I'm introducing like the flaws into the images intentionally.
And you know, as somebody who is so talented in so many different realms, what is next for you? What are you excited about? What are you thinking that you might go to next?
Oh man, well, I've got a lot going on right now. I'm actually like considering developing the next version of the clock. So I'm working on that. I'm really into sewing. Sewing's super fun, so I'm gonna keep doing more of these collage sewn pieces. And then I really want to expand the listening events because they're so meaningful and people love them so much. I want to do more of them in more places. So that should keep me pretty busy.
Well, you can check out the show online, aspencollective.com, Altered Atlas by Jamie Kripke. Thank you. Real pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Rock and roll.